pretentious. You know, if I or my colleagues had been in their 20s and made a film like this, they're all kinds of navel gazing, and the drug scene would have been, the mushroom scene would have been very different, and it was juvenile enough, but this lacks all the philosophy that 20-somethings fail to have, but try to. This is just life as it is lived by a sensitive person who is trying to find her own way. And I thought it was really unique. By the way, this film was on the best 10 lists of many magazines and newspapers. I didn't have time to look them all up, but I did notice that in my brief research. So I want to start out with asking the women in the group, did you notice how the color of her hair changed in the beginning? And what did you think of it? I mean, those of you who've gone through that kind of change when you're young, why did you do it? What did it mean to you? Anybody? Oh, come on, you couldn't have all been gray then, or brunette. Susie, hi.
Your mood. I think it's the mood you're in. The mood. How
Susie, Susie, you're muted, dear. Susie, you're muted. Where'd you go? Susie, I guess you're locked up there somehow. Anybody else want to talk about when they were blonde?
Oh, I'm back. I'm back.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Okay, so tell us what the hair color changes meant to you.
Well, I think that in some respects, it's like a rite of passage that you could be liberated still while living at home. You can change the color of your hair when you're 17 if you live at home, and your parents can't do very much about it, and it's a sense of being independent. It's staying independent. And then the other thing, aside from that personal need to be independent when you're 16, 17 years old, the other thing is not being happy with your identity as it is, feeling insecure, seeing that lots of people have blonde hair, lots of girls have a different color hair. Look at how today it's not changing the color so much of your hair, it's what rainbows do you want to put in your hair. That's a very trendy thing. So I think it has to do with trends also.
Okay, let's back up. I mean, you said a lot there, all of it's true, but what do you think is the underlying cause of it? What does it say beyond independence? And maybe you want to define that more. She was always independent in this film.
Well, she was always looking for something new. When she was in college and in high school, she was such a good student and wasn't happy with that. So she tried something else, and she tried being well, she had like 3 or 4 different jobs. I can't remember what they were, but she didn't stay with them. The one where she was in a hospital, and the day that she had to do a surgery, she ran away.
That was medical school, and it wasn't a surgery. It was when they examine a corpse. It's part of your training. So it's not an autopsy. It's, what do they call it? Somebody knows the name of it.
Dissection.
No, it's different.
It's a cadaver.
Cadaver is the name of the corpse. Yes.
No, post-mortem.
Yeah.
No, my husband's a physician. I went to dental school. We did this.
Okay, the post-mortem. Okay.
You went to medical school. I went to dental school. Yeah.
I visited my brother's cadaver once, and they called her Lucy. But,
we used to bring perfume.
Okay, but again, work is part of our identity, and she keeps changing. What are you going to do when you grow up? And the hair color it's something she chooses and selects, not what is imposed upon her by nature or genetics, if your mother lets you, and I think she was a little older than that. I think the movie starts when she's around 26.
26?
Yeah. Oh. Well, remember the birthday that happened early, she was 30. There were the numerals 30 on the cake. So she can play all ages in the 20s. I'm not, or even late teens. But the point is that she's trying to establish some kind of agency of her own. the choice of her hair, how she puts it up or lets it down. She's trying to assert herself, and we see ourselves through the choices we make, even if they're not motivated by, if they're motivated by trends, I don't get it. But it's this need for self-definition which escapes her in this early part of the film. And I don't think she misleads herself because she follows the right muse every time. In medical school, she says, no, it's not medicine, it's psychology that interests me. And then after that, it's, oh, I want to be a photographer. Oh, and then I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to work in a bookstore. And it's searching, and if you think back to your own 20s, I guess we weren't allowed to be searching after a certain age, but it should never stop. I'm of that generation. Don't be fixed. We're all becoming somebody new every day if we're working at living, even though it doesn't seem like it. And I think what this woman has, and that perhaps many of us did not have, is this total sense of innocence and transparency that she didn't know who she was or what she wanted to do or where she was going, but she knew what she didn't want and what wasn't right for her. And she could only be true to that. And the men in her life didn't get it. Axel, the cartoonist, says, are you sure you know what you're destroying here? And she said, yes, I do. It's something that she's destroying for both of them. So there's this clear-eyed quality that is far mature, far beyond her years. And I found it interesting that the man who wrote this film is not a 20-something. He's in his 40s or 50s by now at this point. And he hasn't had a very long film career. He's probably in his 40s now that I look at his picture, but he kind of looks like Axel if you see it. His name is Eskil Vogt. And so this didn't come out of the mind of a navel-gazing, self-indulgent, pseudo-philosophy loving 22-year-old or 28-year-old. This came out of somebody who's been around. I think the Reiners and Stephen Mona have something to say. Stephen Mona, why don't you unmute? And
what I wanted to say, and it's really not directed, well, I guess it is directed a little to what you just said, but it struck me from the very beginning, she's not in a Jewish family.
Okay.
The whole dilettante approach, not that there aren't young Jewish people searching for the identity, who go to multiple colleges, but there are family reactions very different than what she experienced. And, she takes her tuition and buys cameras. And the reaction, I think, maybe now it's beginning to change, but certainly with the families from Europe and older generations, you just don't act that way. You come up with a plan, you just, you have to do something with your life. You don't just, dabble in this, dabble in that, and see what happens. Go to law school, go be a doc, do something and have a plan. And when it doesn't work, you don't just keep coming home and get welcomed with open arms.
But her mother said something very different than that. Her mother said, well, if you think you'll be happy, go pursue it.
That's part of what I'm saying. That was, I think, not necessarily a very Jewish approach to how this daughter is acting.
Well, I guess you never met an ethical culture Jew, but.
Are you saying Mona and her family are not ethical and cultured?
No, that's Mona, please intercede for me and explain, okay?
Ethical culture was a
No,
school.
okay.
It's a good joke.
Yes, and I got it. I got it, Jim, and I appreciated it. When you talked about how
I was next.
And your parents
Hold on, Frank, you're next.
To know what you're doing. One of the biggest fights I ever had with my mother was I came home for Christmas vacation of my freshman year, and my mother demanded to know what I was going to do with my life. I was 17. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of interesting courses. I really don't know. Well, this was intolerable to her. And we went at it with hammer and tongs. I was so angry. I went off to stay with my sister Diane in Philadelphia. I just had to get out of the house. I thought, my two older sisters are professional musicians, and each knew from a very early age exactly what she wanted to do. So, their course was for music, by the time they were 11. So anyway, I agree with Steve. I did not agree that she was so clear-eyed. I think she was living in the present.
Yes.
And she was tuned in to what she was experiencing at that moment.
Mhm.
What I did not think was clear-eyed about her was if you think of your life in terms of your impact on other people, and she was not oriented to analyze her behavior in terms of the impact it would have on other people.
Mhm.
So I found in that respect, I did not think she was mature at all. I actually think it's a sign of maturity to understand that the choices ones make do impact other people.
Well, I think it's a good observation, but I also think that she was, she says to Axel at one point, just because I'm not as analytical as you are doesn't mean I'm not sensitive. And it's true. I didn't see it as selfishness so much as all I know is my internal moral compass, and I'm not ready for children yet. So my position is we shouldn't do this, and I can't see farther ahead than that. But she doesn't allow herself to be, bullied by her mother into anything. Her mother isn't the bullying type. Another thing, this is Scandinavia, which is extremely liberal, Steve, and there's also a great social policy that allows you to do whatever you want with a great safety net. So you don't have to be a lawyer or a doctor to earn a decent living. You don't have to earn a decent living because the state takes care of so much for you. And it's not meant to take away your motivation. It's meant to make you feel secure enough to live your best life. How's that a plug for socialism? So I apologize if that offends anybody. But the Reiners had something to add.
Yeah, some of what I was going to comment on has been said, but Jim, since you described this movie before we saw it, even in our last session when you said you're going to love it because of this and whatever, and obviously you have related to, you've expressed that how it is struck a responsive chord in your life at that time. I, like others, some have said, didn't relate to it that way. And maybe it's the Jewish influence. We went to college to get a job, to take liberal arts or whatever was at least and from the friends I had, not just my own family. And those, I'm thinking back to my fraternity brothers and others, very directed, not equivocating one way or another. And the women in college who I dated or knew, some later changed. Most of the women, because at that time when we were in school, the opportunities for women weren't as great. Most of them were going to become teachers. There were a few other things, but I didn't know any characters. I couldn't relate. I'd be interested in how many others in this group, in our age group, could relate to that. Now, I see Visage or Pasha in my grandchildren. I have two granddaughters, and one now is in her glorious early or mid-20s and early 20s, and she's out here and she wants to move to New York because she has that opportunity. And she said, "I'm in my 20s and I want to live in New York and have that experience, etc." And I can see that. But in our generation, I don't think so. I'd be interested in the comments of others.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from everybody else as well. I hoped it would resonate with more. I think Iris Bachman was next, and then Steve, and then Gail, and then back to Abby. So Iris, go ahead. Lower left corner, Iris. Just click, there you go.
Yeah. My comment has to do with contrasting her family situation with the family situation she finds herself when she's surrounded by couples with children who are screeching at her, and she just doesn't relate to that. I wondered myself when I was watching the movie if she had any family like that that she grew up in. Family dynamics and placement in a family have a lot to do with choices like that. I mean, I was the third in what you might call a family that had 2 grown children and then had 2 more children, and I was on the bottom end of that. So my choices were very much shaped by what happened with my older siblings. So I wondered about that when I was watching the movie, and I sort of envied her in a lot of ways, the kind of freedom she gave herself. I didn't think I had it. I kind of agree with the Reiners there. I don't think I had that kind of freedom.
Well, maybe it didn't. This is a much more contemporary movie,
Right.
though. It's set in the
Right.
present. Who's next? Gail, I think, and then Steve Zimmerman.
So I wondered how, I don't know most of you, and this is my second time. So I wondered what the generational gap would be, and I'm already hearing it. But I discussed this with my 29-year-old granddaughter, and I thought this was a fabulous film, and I related to it as a Jewish woman who had a bat mitzvah and who had a social worker for a mother. So I was able to be free-spirited, and I think my role as a grandmother now is to make sure that my granddaughter feels like this woman in the film. I thought her life was exciting, interesting, stimulating, everything it should be when you're a young person. But I thought the best part was that she was able to have a dialogue with people. She talked to people. And I thought that maybe is the Scandinavian way. And for those of us who want to talk about the Jewish way, it is the Jewish way also, that we have a dialogue with our lover. And I thought that part was just superb. And my favorite part of the movie was when everything stood still and she ran. I just found that like a deer in freedom. And I thought, how lucky. And I wanted to, this 29-year-old granddaughter that I had, when she had seen it before me, and I said to her, it was just a delightful film. And I enjoyed
What did she say? What did your granddaughter say?
She loved it. And she had also seen an earlier film by him, but she's a film editor in New York. So
really?
She kind of lives this life.
Yeah, all right, she got it. It's a
Yeah,
very
she
well
got
put
it.
together film. By the way, that sequence where time slows down, my notes are love is possible, and it's not a surreal moment because the end of it, she returns to Axel in real time and nothing's changed.
Right.
So this was like experimental action. She's, somebody said to me once that therapy is trial action. You try out ideas to see, it's a thought experiment. And
I have one other comment. I think the music was really terrific in it. I thought the music helped the dialogue and the dialogue helped the music. I think that was superb.
Oftentimes the music can overwhelm the emotion of a film. This did not ever. It found just the right tone to match the tenor of the scenes. You'll notice the first cue is this this jazz version of a 30s love song. I even forget the title, and it's fun. And there's another one that's playful. You don't know that this is a serious film for about 20 minutes,
right? Because
of those 2 music cues, and it's almost like a Woody Allen comedy without the sarcasm, or the bitterness. It's if he could drop the shtick and be honest, his films might have been like this. He was capable of that kind of insight, but he chose to mockingly observe the people in the conversation instead of empathetically, and I so agree with you that the conversations she has with her lovers are just astonishingly candid. They're not even arguments until the very end. They're really processing, how they are with each other and slowly coming to realize she's right. And as a result, she's not destroying a relationship. She's coming to the realization that it's best that it not continue for both of them with Axel. So this is her process, and she's very gifted. That's why I said that she's clear-eyed, whoever corrected me. Yeah, she can be self-indulgent, but she is in her 20s, and this is all she knows. And my point is that she knows not to be swayed by something when the warning lights go off in her mind, saying, no, that's not for you. The mushroom's something else. Okay, who is next? I think Abby, and then Brad and Karen, and then Donna.
Well, I saw it a little bit differently. I feel like she didn't want to be controlled. And you notice, like with the first relationship, she fell in love with him when he says to her, well, I'm older than you. It's not good. So she always wanted something when she didn't want to be controlled, with the baby, having a baby, because that would be so feeling of, I can actually relate to it. My husband wanted the baby more than I did. I just felt, well, I'm 30. That's what I should be doing. And I was in dental school. So I was like the rebellious one. My mother said, just get married. And I have 2 doctorates. Okay. So, which my husband paid for, by the way. So I felt that it was always about, she was afraid when she got really scared every time people wanted her.
Right. And then she leaves, as Axel says.
That's when she leaves, because like even her thoughts about sex. Well, I like it when it's more flaccid, when she wanted to be the control.
She wanted to be the source of the passion rather than somebody presenting her with a physical.
Or somebody overpowering her. Yeah, and I think it has to do with her father. The relationship.
Well, sure, and that's why he's in the psychedelic dream. But it goes back to Mona's argument with her mother. Imagine all the yelling and screaming, which she reported must have happened, right? About why don't you decide what you want to do? Your older sisters did, even though it was in the arts, Mona. I found that really interesting. That satisfied her because they were focused. It was the lack of focus that disturbed her so much. But Julia doesn't her first instinct is not to lash out at her mother or her father or the people on the other side of the conversation. She tries to break it down into what it feels like to be in this relationship or how we process things differently. I think it's a great attribute that she had without even knowing it. I don't know where it came from, other than, her mother, father is a bit of a cheat. And, what is his backache or the fact that he didn't want her to know he was going to the soccer game of his second family's daughter. That was
she felt rejected by
because
him.
he has a new family, right? So
yeah, and so she never wanted to be in that position. It's like a lot of women who have trouble with relationships because they're so afraid of rejection that they don't enter into the relationship. They find a way out because they don't want to be controlled.
And no man ever felt that way.
I don't know. I'm not a man.
All right, that joke didn't land. It's okay. Who's next? Steve Zimmerman, and then okay, Steve.
Okay. I didn't have any problem with her being a free spirit or being promiscuous or struggling to find out what she wanted to do for a living. I didn't, I don't really get that comparison with what Jewish kids used to be like, but I didn't have any problem with that. But I thought maybe it's just because of the way it was written. The guys who she was dumping didn't really have any idea why they were being dumped, okay? In my opinion. I don't think she was at all clear with them. And I found it confusing. And
both of them?
Kind of flighty in kind of an unpleasant kind of way.
Okay, let's talk about that conversation where she breaks up with Axel. It's after the dream-like trial action where time slows down. And it ends in an argument. And she says, there you go. You're always trying to tell me what I think and put words in my mouth. Why is it always words? I want feeling.
Yeah, well, I didn't really get that. I didn't see the guys who she was dumping as being particularly controlling personalities.
I agree.
I think she was intimidated. I thought she felt insecure. I felt like she didn't feel like she could hold her own, perhaps, in those relationships, and then ran away. That was sort of my sense.
Well, her confession at the end of the film to Axel in the hospital is, I was always afraid I wouldn't be a good mother.
You were, well, I couldn't hear you.
She said she was always afraid she wouldn't be a good mother. And then
Well, okay, there was that theme. Yeah,
well,
okay.
but she's explaining something she's never explained to anybody else in her life, that when the subject of children came up, she shied away from it. So it was a hot issue for her and she ran away from it. But I think that was there and nobody got to that. I forgive her for that because she's 26 or 30 and it's okay to feel like I'm not ready to have children. But she couldn't bring herself to say that to Axel. And she chose Ivan because Ivan didn't want children. And anyway, so she thought it would be a good match. And then it turns out not to be so good. So it's all very situational. Go ahead.
I think a lot of women may be struggling with the idea of whether they're ready to be a mother or whether they're mature enough to be a mother. That is very, I think, almost universal in some ways. So that part didn't get me. I kind of got that. I didn't see them as being overbearing on that issue.
They weren't. They weren't, but they were. Well, Axel was certainly insistent, gently, and the other guy wasn't at all. Wasn't a very assertive personality anyway. So I question the long-term suitability.
So he wasn't challenging to her. I mean, and that kind of, in a way, it continued to engender her own confusion. I mean, someone can make you crystallize your thinking a little bit by being, taking a stand and say, so how do you feel about that and why, right?
Yeah.
The second guy didn't have that role, really.
No, he liked her writing and she picked a fight because he liked it, and he liked it for the wrong reasons. So I guess you could say that was juvenile, but that's what came between them. He wasn't intellectually up to her.
Right. Well, that's why I kind of didn't quite get why she dumped Axel, I guess.
Well, it's the rebound. Oh, why did she jump at? Well, it's the rebound effect, and I think Axel was the guy. He says, I've never loved anybody like you. And even she says, I've never talked with anybody the way we have talked. So in her shorter life than Axel's, she realized that this is a pretty unique relationship as well, now that she's losing it. It's not just a notch on her gun, it's a loss she will feel, and she does feel. Brad and Karen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I have to admit, we've been traveling, so we didn't get to see the last couple minutes of the movie, but nevertheless, that won't stand in my way of chiming in. And I hate to use the word epistemology because it sounds so pretentious, but to me, this is a movie about how we know what we know. And in her case, she admits she's self-reflexive. How well does she know herself? I question that. And on the other hand, Axel, who is very analytical, how well does he come to really know her? And those are the questions that just kept coming at me throughout the movie. How well do these people know themselves? How well do they know each other? And how do we know what we know? And I thought it was a wonderful movie that posed that question again and again.
Okay, thank you for that. That's what good movies do. They don't tell you what to feel. They help you process what the feelings are. There is Axel says something to her that addresses what you just said. Maybe I can remember it in a moment, but I think when you don't have a lot of experience, all you can trust is what you know. And for her, it was more visceral than Axel, who was more reflexive, that is self-examining. But it takes us inside, just because we're looking, like you, Brad, you were looking at the two characters in all the two-person scenes, but how do they know what they know? And then you're asking yourself, Brad, how do I know what I think I know about the characters? Because they don't know enough about themselves. So we're all in this limbo together, and that's great characterization. I think we know enough about each one of them to know who they are and not to misjudge them or condemn them. Neither guy was bad or bad for her. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. Axel, when she says, I'm not ready for marriage, he says, most people go into it and they figure it out after the kids are born. In other words, there's an element of risk that he was willing to take because he's 40, he's 15 years older than she is. And she's not ready to take that kind of unknowingness. I know I didn't get married till quite late because I knew I wanted to have a family, but I didn't know that I was ready or had a relationship that could sustain it. So I just stayed miserable and single for many years, decades. And I got lucky, but it's, I don't think it's a female problem, whoever said that. It's you know when you know, and sometimes you need a little push, and sometimes you have to take that step when you don't know. But at 26 and 30, I don't blame her. I didn't think she was self-indulgent. Again, to me, she was true to herself as far as she could know herself. Who is next? Donna, what do you have to share with us?
I was gonna say, everybody talk about when she's in her 20s. Who's to say what life hands us and we're older and we're single? There's nothing wrong with being searching and being a free spirit and looking for love, even when you're older.
Of course not. Yeah. But it's like, this is very focused on this demographic and even the men.
I admire the film. I thank you for showing it. I really appreciate the relationship she went through and how she was searching. I can relate to that. And thank you for showing the film.
I'm glad you liked it. Who hasn't spoken yet? Who had a hand raised? All right, back to Yvette Reiner.
When I was watching the movie, I didn't particularly care for it. I couldn't relate, even though I certainly was one who changed careers numerous times, but I couldn't relate to it. The more I thought about it afterwards, though, the more I could understand it. And the one thing I will say is the actress, and I don't remember her name at all, was outstanding because she seemed like herself. It was really, I thought, excellent acting. But I personally, even though I realized that I grew up in another time, I changed careers, which was very unusual. When I went to college, women just didn't do that. And I wasn't a teacher or a social worker or any of the prescribed areas. But I did, and I am glad because I saw the movie, so I thank you, even though as I was watching it, as I said, I just could not relate. I now can understand more of what I was listening to than I could when I was listening to it.
Jim, I'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead.
You may not be ready for it, but I thought it might have come up by now. I was a little confused by the ending. And by the way, I did see the ending, but the looking out the window and seeing the family, the husband and wife with a baby carriage, and then it shoots to the final scene of her poring over her work, just as Axel did earlier in the movie over his work as a clown. My interpretation, I don't know what the opinion would be that she still did not have children. She's looked out maybe longingly or regrettingly or some way at the family, and she was dedicated to her work. Whether or not she was still with the second guy or not, I'm not.
Let me fill you in on something. When she looked, the epilogue is she's a set photographer and takes a picture of an actress whose boyfriend just broke up with her at a restaurant. And she pulls the actress aside and says, let me take some pictures of you. And the actor says, I was terrible. I was a failure. And then Julie, I think her name is Renata Rensby, says to her, well, just hold on to that feeling of being a failure.
Did I miss that in the movie, or did you say that was in the?
No, that's in the movie.
That is in the movie. I don't know.
And then, no, there's more. What you really missed is that she takes some wonderful still photographs of her still feeling the moment when she's left by the man. And then she looks out the window, and that same actress runs out the door to greet a man with a child. And that man is Ivan, the one who said he didn't want children. It was her lover.
That's right. Yes, yes. I thought it looked like Ivan. Yes.
Okay. So
she was not with him. That's it.
So the irony of ironies is that the guy she thought was good for her because he didn't want to have kids winds up having kids with a terribly sensitive woman who doesn't have a failed relationship with him. And it's like, well, I made my choice, you know, and I think there's almost a look of humor, or she's gently amused at recognizing him with the child.
Jim, I also wanted to say, compatible with the free spirit of the characters, I think that the way the cinematography was so light and airy, I just had it was unpretentious. So it seemed more natural than a lot of movies.
Right.
I don't know whether from a professional viewpoint, noticed anything outstanding about that, but I thought it was well done.
The quality of light is usually very natural. It's daylit through those windows. They may have had supplemental lighting, but every scene feels transparent, like there's nothing lurking in the shadows. What you see is what you get. And in a way, that's how she approaches her life and herself. Things are transparent. You're not meant to see anything other than what you see. The hallucinatory scene is more dramatic than anything else, as is her running through the streets, you know,
yes,
discovering him. There are fleets of fancy in it, but mostly it is transparent. And that in this case is a substitute for stark Scandinavian honesty.
And my final question would be the meaning of the title, "The Worst Women in the World." I think it was mentioned somewhere in a dialogue.
It's about him. But I think she always felt she was the worst person in the world, and everybody's kind of telling her, "You're not, you're not." And finally, she begins to believe it as she lives through her life.
You know, it can be a gray area between being a free spirit and or not staying in the relationships for good reasons, and also being somewhat selfish. And
What's your
whether others had that same feeling or not.
What, that it's a fine line between selfishness and being wise? Is that what you meant? That
she led these guys and took long to realize it was a wrong kind of situation for her and whatever, and the abruptness of the change and the letdown. Anyway.
Well, but they were adults.
It was not that it wasn't a thing that she honestly felt. It was how she did it, I guess.
Well, it's who she was. She wasn't capable of having more with either man at that time.
True.
But you know, what's painful about the movie is that with the death of Axel, and I believe that may have been his apartment she was in at the end, she realizes what she lost. And you feel like maybe she can go on and have something like that now. She certainly has her work to believe in.
I'm very glad that you chose this, and it's a movie that left me thinking about a lot afterwards.
Good.
Are you recognizing any hands? My hand has been up a long time.
Okay, it's difficult for me to see all the pains. Miriam, we'll get to you next, since you haven't spoken yet, and then the Ellisons, Robbie and Jeff, and then back to Iris and back to Abby if we have time. Okay, Miriam, it's up to you.
Yeah, I think the title still leaves me with some strange feeling. I don't know why it was called that. You explained it a little too peripherally for me. I need to know why this movie was called The Worst Person in the World. Can you enlighten me a little bit more than
Well,
you have?
I think that's her feeling. She didn't think she was ready for motherhood because she was the worst person in the world. And Alex at the end says, "You're a wonderful
Did
person."
not treat herself in any way with any kind of self-flagellation, with any kind of
It's not that kind of movie.
excuse me, with any kind of overt regrets of her behavior, without any feeling of, oh my God, I screwed up everything. So that why would she think she was the worst person in the world?
Well, she certainly kept it to herself, as she said to Alex at the end. "I've never said this to anybody, but I didn't think I'd make a good mother." So
Is that
again,
the worst person in the world? A person who thinks they won't be a good mother?
to her, it was. I can't explain it. It's artistic license. If you get hung up on the title, I'm sorry. I hope that you can see the film in other ways. I mean, how else did the film make you feel?
But it was a very good film.
Okay.
And it showed parts that I've never seen on the screen before.
Like what?
Like sitting on the toilet and peeing. That's not the most usual thing you see in a film. And yet it was in such a context that it didn't shock us. We didn't think it was inappropriate, because I think that's one of the explanations of vulgarity. Something that is very inappropriate at the moment is considered vulgar. And if it's very appropriate, they don't consider it vulgar. I didn't consider this anything. I just thought it was part of the relationship that surely has not been shown before in a film, to my knowledge. It has not.
It was refreshingly original. This is the part of the film.
And it fit. It fit.
It fit. They're testing each other. How far can we go before we say we've cheated on our spouses, on our partners? And watching each other pee was one of those tests, and it's fun, but it tells you what's on her mind. And by the way, let's talk about what happened. How did she get into the wedding party where she meets him? She crashed it. Why did she crash it? She was walking along alone because she was leaving Axel's book publishing event, because she felt disconnected and he should stay. And there's that walk, whatever that stretch is that they kept taking us back to with a view of the city, which says to me she's trying to find herself. What's her place in the city? It's a who am I kind of poetic license that doesn't have to live as a symbol, but they went back to it so often. It's her alone with her thoughts. And I think realizing there's something wrong with her relationship with Axel gives her the courage to dive into this, to crash the party, and then to flirt with him in this way.
Okay.
It surprised her too.
Jim, you just gave me another insight into her personality.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I don't think, no, it's good you did. I'm not sure I'm right, but I will express it. She was not willing to go further than she was willing to go. She was not willing to give of herself. So she didn't know the people at the party. That's obvious. You go to parties, and if it's for a special reason, you are prepared not to know the people. Therefore, does that mean you should leave immediately because you are not personally satisfied? Or do you, as a matured person, want to spend a few minutes and perhaps stay at the party for Axel's purpose and for his sake, perhaps go a step? She did not go steps. What did not please her, she was prepared to leave.
Well,
apparently it didn't bother her enough to want to stay.
Enough for you. I mean, we don't know how long she was there. So let's not let the facts get in the way. I think this is the beginning of the indication that Axel's not right for her. We've seen plenty of doubts before, so it shouldn't surprise us that she makes this distinction that his success with the book is not her success. and there's these very juvenile guys that come up and ask about another Bobcat, another immature Bobcat book. And that's not her. These are 20-something men stuck in their teens. They're fanboys. And there's a lot that was alienating about that party. And get a load of this. When she goes into the wedding party, we first see her before she meets Ivan. She's talking to women, and one is talking about her children. And she says, "Do you cuddle your children?" And she says, "Oh, yes, all the time." "Well, they're going to grow up and become addicts." She doesn't really mean that. There's a certain vindictiveness because she's lashing out at Axel's family, asking her, "Do you have a career? Are you going to have kids?" This pressure, and she's had it as, look, I didn't get married till I was 40. And I got tired of my relatives saying, "When are you going to get married, Jim?" And I just say, "I'm not ready." And you get sick of it. And I'm sure your grandchildren who are approaching their 30s now are sick of it as well. So tread lightly, because you won't have an intelligent conversation about it unless you really drink a lot of wine together and sit down out of earshot of their parents and you have a talk, which they're open to under the right circumstances, but not the blunt questions. And that blunt statement of motherhood really offended her. So you could say, as Miriam pointed out, maybe this is a symbol of her immaturity, and her vindictiveness. That's just the mood she was in. I accept it. I don't think that was the meanest thing she did in the whole film. And then he witnesses her talking to these women. And then they connect shortly after that. But I think that was a very telling scene. She's driven away from Axel, and the mother talking about cuddling her kids makes her rebel against that because that's not for her yet. And then she discovers this guy that she can play with. It's safe sex because it's not cheating.
The worst thing that she said was when she said to the second guy, "Are you going to be serving coffee until you're in your 50s?" Mm-hmm. I think this film is really making a commentary on the way modernity, if you will, on society, in the way in which people change their hair color, they change their identity, they go from one thing to another. It's commenting on the idea of we can't even figure out what cheating is. It's making a commentary about the Axel and her's relationship that was really kind of like an isolated relationship where she had to flash her tits in order to kind of get his attention. And further, we get into the stuff of the woman who becomes an environmentalist. She's caught up in doing all this environmental stuff. And then the discussion by the feminists about his
that was hilarious.
I mean, I think that it's really making a comment. It's not a judgment about the society. It's just giving us a kind of view of the lens of modern society. And I thought one of the most powerful moments was when she's talking to Axel, and Axel is saying that he lived in a world before all of this. He lived in a world where there wasn't the cell phones and the computers and so forth. And so I think it's not judging whether this time is better or worse. It's just simply making a commentary that this is the way it is today.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I can still get past her flightiness as not flightiness, but the process of her growing up. But yes, she does.
I'm not even sure she grew up at the end. Yeah, she's a photographer, and that could be like when she was a doctor or when she was a psychologist. We don't. Mm-hmm. We're left wondering, did she ever really figure it out? And of course, none of us really ever figure it out. But she seems kind of, to me, a little bit delayed in certain ways.
Yeah.
Even
okay.
hypocritical.
And I thought it was interesting that Axel told her at the beginning, this isn't going to work because we're at different stages of our lives.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens to
So
them.
it's a safe announcement. Oh, I can go for this. But she says there is a voiceover from some other woman's voice because it refers to her as her. So that's the moment she decided she loved him. And, maybe some of us have experienced that the dangerous element, the innocence of it, I can do this, the permission that she needed to go forward there. But she was happy for a while with him. It was a great relationship for a while until he was proven correct. Any other comments? Iris, your hand is still up?
I did, because you actually have already hit on them. One was the scene where when she leaves the book signing party that she was at with him, and she's walking along that pathway and headed toward the party she's going to crash. And the thought that came to me when I was watching this is, this woman is jealous. She teared up as she was walking. And I felt that she teared up because he was getting these accolades, whether they were for a stupid book or not. They were still surrounding him, and she was not in that picture anymore at that point.
No.
And I thought she was jealous. And then when she got to the party that she crashed, the comment that she made to that woman, that vindictive comment, was because she was angry at that prior scene.
Yeah. I could agree, but I want to refresh your memory. The very first image in the film is Julia alone in that black dress without a back, side view, smoking against the city. And it's hard to tell, hard to hear, but she heaves a big sigh at the end of the shot. So something is not right there.
So was that taken as?
Yes, that's the same party, the book signing party.
Mm-hmm.
And but then later we catch up to it later and find out what it was. It's like her discomfort. I don't fit in. Who am I? Where am I in this world? That's what that represents.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see how you construe that walk as anger and jealousy because it wasn't her crowd. But again, that crowd was, as I said, filled with fanboys, which was not her style.
Well, it's true, but I've seen it. I mean, I think I've seen it before where it's illogical. Still happens.
Yes, of course. Yeah, people, she's not a totally rational person, but she tries her best to listen to her moral compass or ethical compass for herself, even if it excludes or hurts others.
Well, what brought her to say to Ivan, are you going to be pouring coffee for the next 50 years?
She reached her boiling point. Excuse the pun. It's like the argument with Axel. It escalates to a point where she says, "You're trying to tell me what I'm feeling," and that's where it turns on that anger, and that's the insult. I don't know how to answer that, and Ivan leaves. She heard him, and she reached out because that was the limits of her ability to describe what was wrong. So she's not a saint, but she's real. Abby?
I started really crying when he had the pancreatic cancer, and he was telling her how wonderful she was and everything. And she's telling him, I'm pregnant with somebody else's child, but she never told him. She never told him how wonderful he was, and it was really like, I don't know. It was sad because both of the men were very good to her. And actually she broke up with them at the point when they were almost too good. Like one was, I'm getting you coffee. I'm getting, and it was sort of sad to me that, I felt bad because, here he is dying and she's telling, and that person is telling her how wonderful she was.
He's saying you were.
He's telling her how wonderful she is. And the other thing is, as far as the pregnancy, I think she had very ambivalent feelings because when she had the miscarriage, she was it was always like she wanted what wasn't there. It's when she was having the miscarriage, at that point, I think she wanted to be pregnant, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a feeling
I don't know. It was hard to read her face when she looks down and realizes what the blood is from.
yeah.
And then we cut to her
Maybe I
looking at
just
the
put my
photograph.
own kind of, it's just the ambivalence we have about things.
Life is not neat or tidy, and
Yeah, exactly.
she's not 100% sure even at this point.
Right. You're never sure. You're
Sure.
never sure.
Right. But that's why I forgive her for so much.
Yeah, I forgive her too.
Because it's not done out of meanness.
No, it's not. No, it wasn't mean. It was just, she was growing up, and maybe looking back at this, she'll say, gee, whatever. But
Steve Zimmerman,
it was a great movie.
Steve, did you have
Well,
something?
okay. I guess my thought is, I'm not sure. Some people suggested this. I'm not quite so sure how much she did grow up at the end of the movie. In a sum total kind of way. I mean, she has obviously some positive qualities, but I didn't find her through much of the movie a particularly sympathetic character. And maybe that's the point. She doesn't have to be that sympathetic. She's going through all these experiences and there's all this confusion and she doesn't know what she's doing. And there's all these feeling states, I guess, she's going through. And she does hurt people sometimes in a very hypocritical way, like putting the guy down for being a barista. I mean, she's in a bookstore, right? And she's dumping on him for not having a career, but she walked out on the guy who did, right? I mean, so there's, I guess it's okay to not necessarily view her in a particularly sympathetic way. It wasn't necessarily set up to make her that sympathetic. I didn't find her particularly sympathetic.
Did you like the movie at all?
I thought it was an interesting movie. I thought the first half dragged a lot. I wasn't sure I was going to make it through after the first half. Some of the scenes were just too slow. I liked the second half a lot better. I liked the acting of the main male protagonist at the end. I thought he was outstanding.
Right.
I felt her acting was a little uneven, but maybe that's just an expression of the character she was portraying.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't in love with the movie, but I did find it interesting, and I'm glad I watched it.
Good. Miriam?
Yes. Jeff just said that the acting was a little uneven, and I felt that also, but I also felt that was quite brilliant to make it as uneven as it was, because that would be more like perhaps a normal person. She wasn't terribly normal, whatever normal is supposed to mean. I'm not even sure myself. But at the miscarriage scene, when she's in the shower and she looks down and she sees blood, I think it was a brilliant point on the part of the director or the writer or whoever was in charge at that moment to keep her face the way it was. It was so difficult for her to do that, not look shocked, not look unhappy, not look miserable, not look disappointed, but to keep that look that left the audience wondering how she really felt. And so the audience took on the feeling for themselves, what they thought, but she, which I thought was again another piece of very profound acting, she did not let us know how she felt.
Well, I'm glad you appreciated that moment. That's understatement, and it's a directing choice and a writing choice and an actor's choice. And it can be very effective, especially at the end of the movie, because it throws it back into our lap, doesn't it? Wondering. If somebody who likes closure at the end of a movie, then it's not for you. But those of us who say, oh, it's about the process and her journey, then it has a different meaning. Risa had something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say before Steve spoke even that I'm having a problem with the whole thing, and maybe you can help me. I could sit back and say, okay, this movie is being done well and she's a very good actress, and I am not enjoying it at all. I don't like the promiscuity all over the place. I know I'm old and I'm Boston born and bred and therefore a bit of a prude, but
they're promiscuous in Boston.
No, there's no promiscuity in Boston.
But there are too many bars.
I did look something up after I saw the movie about the title. It said, do not think that the title refers only to Julie. It refers to every character in the movie. And each one is a little bit of the worst person in the world. And I could relate to that after I saw the movie. The other thing I had trouble with is not only my own children, but all of my grandchildren to this point, 5 of whom who are in or out of college already, are very goal-oriented. You can change your goal, but it's very important to have a goal and to be directed. And that was missing so much. It just upset me to see people who just don't know where they're going. And all of my college kids now, I have 5 of them, are in or out of college now, are directed. And my 3 children were directed. Now, my son didn't exactly change his goals, but he was ordained as a rabbi and then became a lawyer by plan. He needed to have both in his mind and has led a very good life that way. But I couldn't enjoy it because it was against everything that I grew up with and everything that I directed my children, and my children are directing their children. You have to have goals and know where you are. So you wind up, as I did at 28, with a career and 3 children by 28. So you're supposed to do it all. And I know that that's changed, but
you do it later. You do it later.
You do it later. None of my kids got married till they were 30. So
that's nothing.
I agree with Lisa. You can search for love, but you don't have to have promiscuity in there.
Yeah. Well, I understand why it could be a very foreign film for you, Lisa.
What's foreign?
They don't call it foreign films anymore. They call it international film.
International. Okay.
They didn't want to hurt any foreigners' feelings.
Right.
Dale, and then Susie.
I thought the actress was so well suited. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. I thought she was perfect. There's 2 things I want to bring up. One is, I wish I thought like a Norwegian, because I think that if I did, I could understand even more of this film. But the thing I want to bring up is, okay, so there was sex and there was, I wouldn't call it promiscuous. I don't think she was promiscuous, but there was sex and there was nudity and there were drugs and there was oral sex. And I thought to myself, can I recommend this film to my friends? And I really thought about this. I thought, well, I've just started this film club, and I thought, well, who can I recommend this to? So I recommended it to a 21-year-old granddaughter that I had. I thought, okay, maybe I could recommend it to her. But I wonder how everyone else feels about recommending a film of this type to our peers.
Well, when I first saw it, as I said in my write-up, see it with a 20-something relative or friend. And I guess I was speaking selfishly because I wanted to watch it with my 2 daughters who are 27 and 30 to see how they'd react to it. And one had seen it already and said, yeah, that's a good film. The other one just didn't show up until 7:20 and is in the other room with my wife. So she hasn't seen it. But I said also, well, maybe this is a way of understanding your father and his need to know more about you. So maybe I was being a little selfish by recommending it, but I thought it was a great way of reaching across the generations, because it reached across to me. It resonated from my, wandering 20s, very much so.
But could you recommend it to someone who was 75? Would you say to them, oh, I saw this film? Or would you be nervous that they would be offended by some of the drugs or sex or anything, as the Bostonian said? I don't know.
Well,
I like you said to 75, since I'm 80, almost 81.
No, Reese is not old enough for this film.
Let me know how
I'm
it works
older than
out.
75 too. I gave myself poetic
Okay.
license.
It's
Okay.
like,
But
it-
would you, in other words, I would recommend it to a young person, but would I feel comfortable recommending it
it
to
depends on
my,
the person. I figured you people were all tough, seniors and sophisticated and have seen all of this in movies before, if not worse. You don't have to admit to that, but I figured that, and that it would fly. And excuse me, it was all tastefully done. Relatively tastefully done. I mean, compared to other films that you might object to because it was specious. I mean, the sex was very much a part of each relationship. You can't, and it is part of a relationship, and it's acknowledging that. So I have a lot of conversations with my students, which my wife overhears, and occasionally I'll use the F word. She, oh, you could never do that. You can't say that in front of the students. And they're 22 to 30, And then I'm in a faculty interaction with 15 students. And the lead instructor of that class is using the F word all the time. What do I have to be afraid of?
Enjoy movies of all times. That's how you learn.
Right. You learn good positions from movies.
Of course.
Of course, as long as we're talking about ages here, I'm only 95 and my husband is a kid. He's 93. And wow, are we open to everything?
Right.
Every kind of art, music. I love all music. It could be electronic. I love it. I'm not closed to anything. And as we get older, we open more and more. And I suggest it.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking of recommending it, but I surely could. And have people have their own reactions.
Right. You have less to lose.
I want to make a point.
Susie, yeah. Susie.
The point I want to make is, I'm 81, and I found it not one bit offensive. I liked the movie. What I did not like was the cavalier and frivolous attitude Julia had in her relationships. I do not think, Jim, you are saying that she was looking for depth and the men weren't on her page and they weren't sensitive to her feelings and whatever. I think relationships are about patience, not just physical attraction and not just going out and sleeping together. I don't think she was a patient woman. I don't even think she was a woman. I would call her a girl even at 29. I don't think she had patience either with Ivan or with
Axel.
Axel. They loved her. They really cared about her.
Yeah.
And she just blew that off.
Well, but she loved them too in her own way. When Axel's dying, she says, when they're breaking up, what was the scene when
she blew him off. That was later.
No. When the scene in which she leaves, she says, I love you and I don't love you. And that's the problem.
Yes. What I'm saying is, in a relationship, if you get that close to somebody, and I love you, but I don't love you. I love being with you, but I don't love being with you. I think it's realistic to walk out the door and pack up your stuff.
Well, that's the story they chose to tell. So
Pardon me?
That's the story the filmmakers chose to tell.
I don't think it's a realistic one, and no, that's not true. I don't think it's a story that deserves all these accolades. Let's just say
But
that.
you liked it.
For me.
What did you like about it? And you said you liked the film.
I did like the film. I liked her. I've been to Norway 3 times. I liked it. That was Oslo. I liked being in Oslo. I like those things. I mean, there just isn't one thing in a film that you need to like.
But you liked her, and yet you feel she's petty and
Sitting.
trivial and abusing her lover.
I liked her as an actress. I thought she portrayed a
Okay.
frivolous, spoiled
Okay.
woman,
I
a
see.
girl.
Okay, I think, Brad, if you don't mind, let's let Arla say something since we haven't heard from her. Arla, you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. So the caveat here is that I saw this film, many months ago, pre-Oscars, and I didn't have time to rewatch it. But given that, and I've been enjoying the discussion, but I just want to comment on this idea of the female protagonist being labeled as being promiscuous. I'm wondering if there isn't a bit of a double standard here. I mean, after all, when she was quote unquote playing the games with the, at the party, and she was, testing the limits, he was doing the same thing, and he was involved with somebody at the time. I don't hear any attacks on him or any labels as being promiscuous.
I wasn't being critical when I said she was promiscuous. That's simply a fact. She's like the star of the movie. So yeah, there was a lot of promiscuity all throughout the movie. It's sort of like flings all over the place.
She was serially monogamous, though.
Yeah, right. That's not promiscuous.
It was one at a time, even though the borders were quite abruptly drawn from one to the other. Okay, we're running out of time. Now, does anybody want to add anything? Brad?
Jim is a student of or teacher of cinema. I wanted to ask you somewhat of a technical question. Do you think that this movie was in the Eric Romer tradition? Eric Romer of My Night at Maud and Claire's Knee and all of those wonderful movies dealing with broken relationships, filmed very naturally.
I haven't seen them in decades. My recollection is that they were much slower, and the voids between people's conversation were duller. It was more intellectual than this. This was more transactional. Just let's talk about our relationship, and she showed remarkable candor there, and then she split. That's the short form of it. Whereas in Romer's, they're trying to. I was too young when I saw the Romer films, and I just wasn't ready for it.
Watch them again. They're magnificent.
Okay.
I'm hoping you'll explain to us, Jim, before we end, how they film the scene where everyone is frozen and she's running.
It's a very frequently used technique in commercials. I can't answer that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably they run through the scene quickly. Well, she runs through the scene. Each of those people can be placed in there with computers. I'm not sure. They're all added later, which is why they're so perfectly still.
Okay, well, if I can be, I'll be really quick because I've been waiting forever. I totally disagree with the person who said that Julie acted out of fear. I never thought she acted out of fear. I agree with the person who talked about the double standard. I did not think this woman was promiscuous. She was sexual, and she engaged in serial monogamy. I didn't think she was acting jealous when she left the party. She realized that Axel was the center of attention. It wasn't her world. She wasn't comfortable in that world where he was the center of attention. And actually, very interesting thing in Neil Simon's autobiography, he explains how his first wife never went to the big parties after opening night, after the first or second one, because she just said to him, "This is your world and it's not mine." But she was nice enough to approach Axel and ask if it was okay if she left. She didn't walk out in a huff. She was just not comfortable. I don't think she was ever hypocritical. She acted cruelly. She acted selfishly. I think her fundamental flaw was she lacked empathy, and she lacked any sense of the circles of influence that her conduct had on others. She was operating for herself at all times and operating so that she would feel and understand her own feelings, but she wasn't anticipating or thinking about what the others felt. The scene that I thought was absolutely hilarious and very true was when she's with the group of men, and she said, if men had periods, we would be hearing about this all the time. It would be blood, blood, blood. And I thought, yes, that's absolutely true.
And I said, absolutely not.
And I finally wanted to say that I thought Axel was an incredibly understanding, patient, intuitive person who really appreciated her very deeply. And at the end, he's able to express to her his deep fear of dying and he's completely honest about the state that he's in. And I had the feeling, we've seen him with his family and the friends and the little kids. I had the feeling she was the first person he could be totally genuine with. It's a short scene in a car, and he says to her, it sucks, everything sucks. And she was very valuable to him in that moment.
That's when she takes him back to his childhood home.
Right.
After the hospital.
Right.
Jim, can I just say that one of the reasons I liked this so much, first of all, I was not very critical while I was watching it, and I had no intentions of being that critical, was its universality. Somebody mentioned Oslo. We've been to Oslo, and it's a fantastic city. There's no doubt about it. But why could this not take place in Reese's Boston, in New York City, in Philadelphia, in Los Angeles? Why could it not take place? We are dissecting a young woman, dissecting her to pieces, plus her two lovers, which we should do in a film group. But it wasn't particularly Oslo. It was, to me, universal.
Okay.
Just remember one other thing. It's a 2-hour movie, and you're putting a lot of different time schedules in a 2-hour movie. So you have to see so many different scenes, so many different parts of a person's life in 2 hours. And I can't say that she was over-sexual, under-sexual. This is what eventually happened.
Okay.
You just answered what my comment was, what I feel was missing from here, and maybe it was only because you only had so much time in a movie. But she was devoid of any relationships with other women. Usually in movies of this type, where they have women friends who they confide in whatever, or converse about their indecisions and their problems. That's completely missing here.
I didn't miss it. They didn't have time to show it. It wasn't that relevant. It wasn't that pertinent. So I personally disagree with you, and I did not miss it.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'd like to cut the discussion off now. My answer to that, though, Frank, is that it's not the film they chose to tell.
Sure, I understand.
And it's its own beast. It's not like one of those others, whatever you're referring to.
Right.
Now, in answer to Miriam's question, why couldn't this be made in any other city? The practical reason is, if you look at the credits, all the sources of money that funded it are Scandinavian and European. To get that kind of a credit, you have to shoot it in Europe. That's number one. That's the gross nuts and bolts of it. Number two is, this has a distinctly Scandinavian, European, modern, sophisticated sensibility to it. We commented on the lighting, on the lack of guile, the lack of gimmicks, although there were those two scenes. It's understated in the way that Japanese or Chinese films are. It sneaks up on you because it doesn't try and do too much in any one scene, but it accrues. Your knowledge of her, your feeling for her, for the situations comes up. We don't make films like that in America. We make films that are in your face from the start to the finish, and maybe there's a graduation or a gradation of intensity as you go through it, despite what they call a third act structure. It's for idiots. But I want to move on and talk about, but I agree it's universal, because this is about somebody trying to reach some truthful place within themselves. And I so respect that. And I found it lacking in guile, and very refreshing, or a very unique film in the way it was told and portrayed. I want to talk about a film in 2 weeks, and it's not a new film. I watched it again yesterday and was very taken by it again. Many of you may have seen it. It's actually a religious film, and it's called The Life of Pi by Ang Lee, about a boy in a lifeboat with a tiger.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we saw it.
Would you like to see it again and discuss it if people aren't interested? But this is the whole thing is a religious parable about who or what is God and where does he reside. And you have to decide for yourself. So I think it's an extremely religious film. It's not about spirituality, it's about belief. And where does that come from? And if you like dogs and cats, you're going to love this movie because the tiger is just, oh, you want to squeeze him, you know, even while he's growling at the boy in the boat. It's a profound effort. A lot of people criticize it because the boy starts out as a very young kid who is so fascinated with religions, he dabbles in all of them. You know, Vishnu brought him to Christ. You know, it's that kind of eclectic thing. The kid just loves superheroes, and then he goes on this journey. I would really like to show it again. I think it will leave you very moved at the end. The last 20 minutes are extremely important. You might want to make notes because his journey with the animals escaping from the sinking ship is a parable, perhaps, right, for a human story. And he has to retell it in another way than we have been told for 2 hours to insurance adjusters. And that last 20 minutes is worth watching again.
Where do we find it?
I think it's on Amazon Prime. The Life of Pi, P-I.
Jim, in 2 weeks, it's Shavuot, and so I don't know if that Saturday night is going to work.
Okay, right. So stay tuned, but that will be the next one. Maybe we'll do it in 1 week or 3 weeks. So Hannah, will you look into that for us?
Yeah.
Okay, and let me know, and then I'll send out an announcement. But thank you all. This was a very thoughtful discussion. It's so good when we have differences of opinion and can sweep away some of the cobwebs and straighten some things out, and then also still sort of enlighten each other's views. I do suggest, in terms of enlightening each other's views, David Brooks, the Jewish, who knows what he is now, but the editorial writer for the New York Times, has a wonderful piece upon two schools of thought. Do we own ourselves, or are we part of a larger whole? And he talks about the culture wars in this country and how the only way to heal them is to acknowledge that there's something in each one, which is not a surprise. He's taken that tack before, but it's a particularly well written piece. I think it was the New York Times today. I read it at lunch, so it must have been today. And it's relevant to what we talk about here, because it's like, how do you live in the gray area between extremes? How do you find that? And it's very difficult. And for me, it's like, if there's anything we're capable of, and the animals, not so much so, it's nuance. But we're not exercising that human talent, that skill that we are hardwired to do when we're on our best behavior. So that's it. You'll get an announcement from me, hopefully by the end of this coming week, as to when the next film is, but it will be Life of Pi, unless the Duke is available, in which case we'll see that next. So thank you all. See you in 2 weeks, maybe 1 week, maybe 3 weeks. Hannah will figure that out for us. Okay, good night all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.